'cause you can't, you won't, and you don't stop. Or when you can't, you won't, and you don't stop. Mike D coming down for sure.
Agency theory is such a ubiquitous theory in corporate governance. It's the basis of virtually all the regulation in the particular area, that I thought I'd do two approaches to explaining the theory. One, this one, a more informal approach to give you a sense of how it works. And the second one, which follows the slides, which is some of the formal elements of agency theory as it truly is in a theory. Because how it's used in practice, it aligns with the theory, but I think it's more intuitive. And I think seeing this and then seeing the formal approach might help you understand things a little bit better. So what I'm going to do is talk about agency theory as applied to the company and how it's applied colloquially rather than as a strict theory per se. We will hit the main points of theory, but they'll be subtly different, and I might not go through all the assumptions, etc., that underpin the theory, which is where it can fall down. I'll leave that for the formal approach. So why don't we hop into understanding agency? Okay, so the basic idea behind agency theory, not agency law, is that there are these principals, okay, who are traditionally positioned as the shareholders in the firm. And they give their money, their resources, the equity in the firm to a group to manage it. Okay, so they delegate to managers who are their agents. Now we know, strictly speaking, that that isn't the true legal position of what's occurring, but this is how the theory applies. So it's a theory, it is not agency law. Okay, managers aren't the agents of shareholders. They're the agents of the company. I just want to really make that clear. That legal agency law is different to agency theory. Under agency theory, shareholders delegate the money to managers to run the. And one of the core problems that we can get is that these people, the managers, can run the business in a way that doesn't maximise the interests of these people, the people who've actually given them the resources. Okay, so what we're talking about is an interest misalignment. So, think about it in a simple way. These people might decide to pay themselves more money. Okay, so they pay themselves more money than what you might be able to negotiate. What else might these people do? Well, there's a well-known trend in large organisations that managers can pursue growth over shareholder wealth. I won't go into the details of that. I'll leave that for when you do some finance theory, but essentially it's when the firm pursues growth over the cost of the weighted average cost of capital. So technically you can pursue growth and profitable growth, so you can make more money and have a bigger business but destroy shareholder wealth because you're not making enough money to recompense the shareholders for the risk that they're taking. And the other thing that you can get here is managers might pursue perquisites. Okay, so you might not have heard of the word perquisites, but you might have heard of the word perks, right? So what are perks? Things like flying first class, have a big office, all those kind of things. So think about flying first class. Who's paying for it? Well, the shareholders in the dividends they're not going to get, rather than it's not coming out of the manager's pockets most of the time. So is it really necessary for that cost, right? I mean, of course the managers want to fly first class, but the shareholders might not want them. So this is where we have this misalignment of interests. Now, one of the big misalignment of interests is actually probably the biggest one, which is risk profile. So what economic theory tells us is that shareholders want more risk than managers would normally want to take. Okay, so why is this? Well, this is this person's full-time job, right? It's their reputation, and often in large companies they also have some form of equity. So this person has a lot at stake. A manager actually has a lot at stake. Compare it to a shareholder, right? Economic theory says you should hold a diversified portfolio, right, or finance theory. Now, if you hold a diversified portfolio in any single company, maybe this is at most 5% of your total wealth. So when it comes to what's at risk, for the shareholder, 5% of wealth, yeah, that's a lot, but compare it to your job, your reputation, equity that you hold, right? If something goes wrong, if the company goes broke, the managers stand to lose a lot more than the shareholders do. So a lot of agency theory is about aligning this risk profile. And that is where the idea of incentive pay actually comes from in agency theory. What you have to do is you have to pay these people a lot more for success, right, than what you might traditionally do. Why? Because you want them to put this at risk. Okay, so this stimulates them to take greater risk, not to work harder. Right? So incentive pay under agency theory is really not about working harder. It's about taking greater risk. Okay. Now, why can these agents, these managers, take advantage of shareholders? Well, quite simply, there's like a barrier between them in terms of information, right? So the managers know what's going on in the company, they know sales data, they really know what's happening. Shareholders don't see this. In fact, under the theory, it's called information asymmetry. And that's what allows the managers to take advantage of the shareholders. Okay, so these costs, perks, paying too much, pursuing growth at the expense of profitability, these kinds of things are called agency costs. Right? It's the cost of the agency relationship. And agency theory says to be efficient, we want to minimise these costs. So how do we do that? How do we minimise agency costs? Okay, one way is to reduce information asymmetry. How do we do that? Okay, that's why, for instance, we have the audit, which goes in and checks the figures being produced by management. Are they accurate? It's also, very importantly for our unit, why you have the board of directors. The board of directors' role is to monitor management and make sure they're doing what the shareholders actually want. Okay, they're a form of reducing information asymmetry. That's the key role of the board, to monitor and control managerial self-interest. The second way, which we won't talk a lot about in this unit, so we reduce information asymmetry, the second way is to align interests. And that we do through the employment contract. Essentially, we're talking about incentive pay and how we structure pay for executives to minimise these agency costs. Okay, that was a very brief introduction to agency theory and how it's applied. Now, once we understand this theory, it explains a lot of the rationale in regulation. For instance, having a majority of independent directors. Why do you want independent directors? You want independent directors so that they're not self-interested and they can monitor management who are self-interested when they're acting. Okay. Why do you separate the CEO chair role? Well, so that you have someone with some sort of power other than a manager to act as a good monitor? Why do you have an audit committee? To be able to monitor, right? So a lot of the prescriptions in corporate governance, you can sheet back to this theory, and it underlines a lot of the thinking, which is why it's so important. In the next little series of videos, what we're going to do is go through the theory, the classical theory, which is more than about boards. You can apply it to other kinds of situations other than corporate governance. So we're going to go through the classical theory a bit more formally and make sure we check off all the elements of the theory. Okay, let's do that in the next video.